I woke up with no memory, only to find my own face on a memorial portrait in a mansion where everyone thought I'd been dead for years. Now I'm trapped in a deadly organized scheme, and my only hope of survival is remembering why I was buried before the internal security check finds me. They say the mind is like a house, but for me, someone has turned off all the lights and locked the doors from the inside. Imagine waking up in a sterile hospital bed with a heavy bandage wrapped around your skull and absolutely nothing behind your eyes. No childhood memories, no names of parents, no sense of who you are, just a hollow, echoing silence. The doctors called it a miracle I survived, though they couldn't explain what had happened to me. I had been found on the side of a highway with no ID, just a cheap prepaid phone and a crumpled note in my pocket. I spent weeks living like a ghost. I took the name Sarah because the social workers needed to call me something, but it felt like a borrowed coat that didn't fit. I was living in a halfway house, my days filled with the crushing anxiety of the unknown. The only lead I had was that note. It had an address, 1422 Ridgeway Drive, and a simple instruction: Monday, 9 a.m., cleaning, entrance B. Desperation is a powerful motivator. With no money and the threat of being back on the streets looming, I spent my last few dollars on a bucket, some generic detergents, and a bus pass. I didn't know if I was actually a cleaner, but the muscle memory in my hands as I scrubbed the floors of the shelter suggested I knew my way around a mop. Ridgeway Drive was a world I didn't belong in. The houses were hidden behind towering stone walls and wrought iron gates that looked like they belonged to medieval fortresses. These were the homes of people who owned the world, while I didn't even own my own history. As the bus dropped me off at the edge of the estate, I felt a strange, gnawing sense of dread. The air felt colder here, the silence more oppressive. I found the gates for Blackwood Estate. My heart hammered against my ribs as I pressed the intercom. My palms were slick with sweat, making the plastic handle of my bucket slide in my grip. "State your business," a voice crackled. It was sharp, professional, and entirely devoid of warmth. "I'm here for the cleaning shift," I whispered, my voice trembling. "Entrance B. I have the note." There was a pause, a silence so long I thought they had disconnected. Then the massive gates began to groan open. I walked up the winding driveway feeling like an ant crawling across a giant's dinner table. The house was a masterpiece of dark glass and gray stone, a brooding monument to wealth. But as I approached entrance B, a side door tucked away behind a screen of ivy, the feeling of déjà vu hit me like a physical blow. I knew the exact number of steps it took to reach the door. I knew that the third step had a slight chip in the corner. I reached out to knock, but before my knuckles could graze the wood, the door swung inward. A man stood there. He wasn't a butler or a servant. He was dressed in a tailored suit that probably cost more than the hospital bill I couldn't pay. He was handsome in a rugged, weathered way, with eyes that looked like they hadn't seen sleep in years. The moment he saw me, he didn't ask for my credentials. He didn't look at my bucket of cleaning supplies. Instead, the color drained from his face until he was as pale as a sheet. He stumbled back, his hand flying to his chest as if he'd been shot. "Eleanor?" he gasped, his voice a ragged whisper. I shook my head, confused. "No, sir, I'm Sarah. I'm here to clean." He didn't seem to hear me. He lunged forward, grabbing my shoulders with a grip that was both desperate and terrified. His eyes scanned my face with an intensity that made me want to scream. "It can't be. We buried you. I saw the casket go into the ground." My blood turned to ice. "Sir, you're mistaken. I lost my memory. I'm just a cleaner." He pulled me into the hallway, his movements frantic. He pointed to a massive gold-framed portrait hanging in the center of the foyer. I looked up and the world seemed to tilt on its axis. The woman in the painting was me, every curve of the jaw, every spark in the eyes. It was me. But it was the gold plaque at the bottom that shattered my reality. It bore a name, Eleanor Blackwood, and 2 dates. The second date was exactly 2 years ago. "You're dead," the man whispered, his eyes filling with a terrifying mix of hope and horror. Everyone saw the body, the internal proverca, the headlines. It was all over. Before I could process the words internal proverca, a sharp click echoed from the top of the marble staircase. We both looked up. A woman was standing there, looking down at us. She was dressed in an expensive silk robe, her expression unreadable. But she wasn't looking at the man. She was looking at me, and in her hand she held a phone, her thumb hovering over a button. "Arthur," she said, her voice like broken glass. "Why is there a ghost in our foyer, and why does she have the keys to the safe?" I looked down at my hand. I wasn't holding a key. But as I followed her gaze to the floor, I saw that a small silver key had fallen out of my cleaning bucket, a key I had never seen before in my life. The man, Arthur, looked at the key, then back at me, his face twisting into something dark and accusatory. "Where did you get that? That key was supposed to be destroyed the night of the incident." Suddenly, the front door was kicked open, and several men in dark tactical gear swarmed the entryway. They weren't police. They had no badges, only cold clinical precision. "Secure the target," one of them barked, pointing directly at me. "Target?" I screamed, backing away. "I'm just a cleaner." Arthur didn't try to protect me. He stepped back, his face hardening into a mask of cold calculation. "If she has the key, she has the evidence of the organized scheme. Don't let her leave this house." I turned to run, but the woman at the top of the stairs spoke again, her voice amplified by the silence of the hall. "It's too late for running, Eleanor, or Sarah, or whoever you've convinced yourself you are. You shouldn't have come back to finish the job." As the men closed in, the woman threw a folder down the stairs. It fluttered open, scattering photos across the floor. They were photos of me, but not as a socialite or a cleaner. In the photos, I was holding a weapon, standing over a body, my face cold and unrecognizable. "You aren't a victim," she spat. "You're the one who started this, and today you're going to tell us where you hid the rest of the evidence before you disappear for a very long time." The man in the tactical gear reached for my arm, his movements blurred and professional. I didn't think. I didn't plan. My body reacted with a violent, terrifying precision that I couldn't explain. I stepped inside his reach, my elbow connecting with his jaw in a sickening crunch, and before he could recover, I had twisted his wrist, sending his heavy, illegal weapon clattering across the marble floor. I stood there, gasping, my hands trembling as they hovered in a defensive stance. I didn't know I knew. "She still has the training," Arthur whispered, his face a mask of awe and terror. "The memory is gone, but the muscle memory, it's still there." "Enough of this theater," Lydia screamed from the balcony. "She's a liability. She was supposed to take the fall for the organized scheme, Arthur. She was the one who handled the packages with the prohibited substances. She was the one who negotiated with the radicals. If she's alive, the internal security check will never close the case. We'll all be facing a huge sentence." My head throbbed, a white-hot spike of pain blooming behind my eyes. Radicals? Prohibited substances? The words felt like stones being dropped into a deep, dark well. I wasn't a cleaner. I wasn't even the socialite in the painting. I was something much darker. The tactical men didn't give me time to process. 3 of them moved at once. I managed to dodge a strike and kick out at another, but I was outnumbered. A heavy boot caught me in the ribs and the world spun. I felt a sharp prick in my neck, a sedative. As the darkness began to crawl into the edges of my vision, I heard Arthur's voice sounding miles away. "Don't kill her. Not yet. We need to know where she hid the ledger. If the internal security team finds it first, we're dead anyway." When I woke up, the air was cold and smelled of damp concrete and old iron. I was tied to a heavy wooden chair in a room that looked like a high-tech bunker hidden beneath the mansion. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting long, jagged shadows against the walls. Arthur was sitting across from me, his expensive suit jacket removed, his sleeves rolled up. He looked less like a grieving husband and more like a man who had spent his life managing a violent empire. On the table between us sat the silver key that had fallen from my bucket and a series of documents stamped with "Confidential Internal Security." "You were the best we had, Eleanor," Arthur said, his voice soft, almost mourning. "You could move through a room like a ghost. You managed the entire organized scheme for 3 years without a single leak, but then you got greedy. You started keeping records. You threatened to go to the Internal Security Service with everything, the illegal weapons, the contracts with the radicals, all of it." "I don't remember any of that," I sobbed, the ropes cutting into my wrists. "I just want to go home." "This is your home," he snapped, standing up and leaning over me. "And you're going to tell me where the rest of it is. The key opens a locker in the city, but the locker was empty. You moved the evidence before the accident on the highway. You staged your own death, didn't you? You tried to disappear with a heavy accusation hanging over our heads, hoping we'd be picked up by the authorities while you started a new life." He grabbed my chin, forcing me to look at him. "Where is the ledger, Eleanor? Where is the list of everyone involved in the network?" "I don't know," I screamed. "I don't know who I am." A door at the back of the room creaked open. Lydia stepped in, but she wasn't alone. She was pushing a small, trembling boy in front of her. He couldn't have been more than 6 years old. He looked exhausted, his eyes wide with a fear that mirrored my own. The moment he saw me, he broke away from Lydia's grip. "Mommy?" he whimpered. The word shattered the remaining walls in my mind. A flash of a memory, a birthday cake, a small hand in mine, the smell of rain on a playground, tore through my brain. But it wasn't a happy memory. It was followed by the sound of tires screeching and the cold, hard weight of a weapon in my hand. Arthur smiled, a cruel, thin line. "He's been waiting for you to come back from your trip, Eleanor. Now you have 5 minutes to tell me where the evidence is, or I'll make sure the boy is the one who faces the heavy accusation. We'll tell the internal security team he was the one being used to transport the prohibited substances. They won't care how old he is." I looked at the boy, my heart breaking into 1,000 pieces. I opened my mouth to speak, to beg, to say anything, but then a red laser dot appeared on Arthur's chest. A voice crackled through the intercom system of the bunker, cold and synthesized. "Target identified. Initiate the purge." The lights went out. In the total darkness, the only thing I could hear was the sound of the heavy vault door at the top of the stairs being sealed shut from the outside. Then, an electronic hiss filled the room. "Arthur," Lydia's voice came through the dark, filled with sudden, frantic realization. "The internal security check didn't fail. They've been waiting for us all to be in the same room." Suddenly, the wall behind me slid open, revealing a hidden compartment I hadn't seen. Inside was a small, glowing screen and a keypad. A message was blinking in bright red letters. Recovery mode activated. Voice recognition required to stop ventilation purge. The boy screamed as the room began to fill with a faint, sweet-smelling gas. Arthur lunged for the keypad, but he didn't know the code. He turned to me, his eyes bulging with desperation. "The code, Eleanor! The code to stop the gas!" I stared at the screen, and for the first time since I woke up in that hospital bed, a single string of numbers flickered in my mind. But as I reached out to type them, I saw a second message scroll across the bottom of the screen, one that only I could see from my angle. "The boy is not yours. Look at his eyes." I looked at the boy's eyes. They weren't hazel like mine, nor dark brown like Arthur's. They were a piercing, icy blue, the same color as the eyes of the woman standing at the top of the stairs earlier. This wasn't my son. This was another layer of the organized scheme, a psychological weapon used to break my spirit and force my memories to surface. The realization acted like a cold splash of water. The sweet-smelling gas was filling the room, and Arthur was clawing at his throat, his face turning a mottled purple. Lydia had collapsed by the door, her hands fumbling with a dead intercom. The message on the screen began to count down. 10, 9, 8. My fingers moved across the keypad with a speed that defied thought. 072149. The code wasn't a date or a phone number. It was the serial number of the first illegal weapon I had documented when I started the internal check. The hiss of the gas stopped instantly. The heavy ventilation fans groaned to life, sucking the sweet poison out of the room. The red emergency lights flickered and died, replaced by the cool, steady glow of the bunker's backup power. How did you know?" Arthur wheezed, slumped against the table. I stood up, the ropes that had seemed so tight suddenly feeling loose. I had slipped the knots minutes ago using a technique I now remembered learning in a windowless room halfway across the world. I wasn't Eleanor Blackwood, the socialite wife. I was an operative who had spent 3 years deep undercover to dismantle this network from the inside. "The note in my pocket," I said, my voice cold and steady. It wasn't a job offer. Cleaning was the code for the final phase of the operation. I wasn't here to scrub floors, Arthur. I was here to clean the house of people like you. The accident on the highway hadn't been an accident at all. Arthur had discovered my true identity and tried to have me eliminated, but he hadn't accounted for the fact that I had already uploaded the ledger to a secure server, triggered by a dead man's switch. The only thing missing was the physical key, the one that had fallen from my bucket, which contained the encryption codes for the entire organized scheme's financial history. "You're going to face a huge sentence," I said, looking at Lydia as she crawled toward the stairs. "The internal security check didn't just find the substances and the weapons. They found the offshore accounts. They found the names of the radicals you've been supplying." Suddenly, the vault door at the top of the stairs didn't just open. It was blown off its hinges. The real internal security team, the one I actually worked for, swarmed the room. They weren't wearing the tactical gear of Arthur's mercenaries. They wore the insignias of the high-level task force I had belonged to before the memory loss. A man I vaguely recognized as my handler stepped forward, his eyes full of relief. "Agent 417, we thought we'd lost you after the crash. We've been tracking that prepaid phone since you turned it on." "It took me a while to find my way back," I admitted, watching as Arthur and Lydia were zip-tied and led away. "But the cleaning is finally done." As they led the boy away, I realized he was just a relative of one of Arthur's associates, coached to play a part. The cruelty of these people knew no bounds. They had tried to use a child to manipulate a woman they thought was broken. I walked out of the mansion and into the cool morning air. The sun was rising over Ridgeway Drive, but the estate no longer looked like a fortress. It looked like a crime scene, swarming with officials and flashing lights. My memory hadn't fully returned. There were still dark corners in my mind, gaps where my childhood and my real name used to be. But as I looked at the silver key in my hand, I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't Sarah the cleaner, and I wasn't Eleanor the victim. I was the storm that had finally broken over Blackwood Estate, and for the first time in months, I knew exactly who I was supposed to be. I boarded the black SUV waiting for me at the gates. The handler looked at me, a small smile on his face. "Ready to go home?" I looked back at the house one last time. "I don't have a home yet," I said, "but I think it's time I went and found one." The gates of the estate closed behind us, locking away the ghosts of a life I never wanted. The organized scheme was dismantled, the evidence was secure, and though my past was still a puzzle, my future was finally mine to write. I had walked into that house a ghost, but I walked out a survivor. And as we drove away, I realized that sometimes losing your memory is the only way to truly find out what you're made of.